Chairman Loudermilk, thank you so much for being on the program. Yeah, the country just seems to be in shambles. We seem to be a bit of a laughingstock. And many, I think, around the country, and certainly on this program, look at the events of January 6th and see some real head-scratching contrivances and actions by our leaders on that day. And so I just the floor is yours. Could you update us on your work in your committee?
Well, thanks for having me on, first of all. And you're right about the time we're living in is strange. It's weird, and it's exacerbated by every theory you can imagine under the sun through social media and every platform. Everyone's got a theory about what happened or what didn't happen. And so part of our job was to cut through all of that and get to the truth of what happened, because American people deserve the truth, to know what happened on January 6th and what didn't happen. And so we are now a year and a half into the investigation. We actually started at the beginning of this Congress in January of last year, when then Speaker Kevin McCarthy appointed me as the chairman over this special subcommittee looking into what happened on January 6th, because we knew, even from the legislative branch, things didn't add up. And I knew from firsthand experience that the report that came out from the Select Committee, Pelosi's committee, was just filled with inaccuracies and flat out lies. And so we needed to get to the bottom of what really happened. The first year was basically just investigation, getting information together, because the Select Committee, Pelosi's committee, failed to archive a lot of the information, a lot of the documents that they supposedly used. I mean, they videotaped every deposition and transcribed interview, and they're all missing. They didn't keep any of them. And there were documents that were sent to the White House instead of their House documents. But instead of being archived in the House, they were sent to the White House or the Department of Homeland Security. And what we found out is through a lot of effort in acquiring those documents, basically would not take no for an answer. And we fought the Homeland Security, we fought the White House. We were able to get those documents. And as what we found out is any document or any evidence that didn't support the preconceived narrative by Pelosi Select Committee was either destroyed or it was hidden with the intention of us not seeing it. But through the work of our committee and especially our staff, we've been able to uncover a lot of information that totally dispels the narrative that Americans were sold by the Select Committee on January 6th.
So just prima facie, that's illegal, right? You can't just delete the evidence.
You're not supposed to, that's for sure. It's in the violation of House rules as well as the guidelines from the clerk of the House. Now, technically, according to the clerk, it's up to the chairman's decision, the discretion of the chairman of the committee, what should be archived. But the guidelines say that the chairman has to archive anything that is relative to their legislative work, which basically, if you used it in a report, it had to be archived. What we're looking at is they purposefully didn't use information in their report. For instance, everyone's familiar with Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, her earth-shattering testimony in June of 2021, to where she was paraded before America and she came up with these elaborate stories about President Trump trying to take the steering wheel from the Secret Service agent, choking a Secret Service agent, agreeing that Mike Pence should be hung. I mean, there was a lot of information that she gave that they put her on the world stage without any corroboration at all, especially when it came to the president supposedly attacking 2 Secret Service agents. Now, you would think if you're running a real investigation, and first of all, you got to consider the timeline of her testimony. She had already testified 3 times before the committee and didn't mention any of this stuff. After her 3rd testimony, she had a private meeting with Liz Cheney. After that meeting, Cassidy Hutchinson fired her attorney, and Liz Cheney got her a new attorney, pro bono. And then there was a 4th interview when all of this came out. Immediately after her 4th interview, which was just her and Liz Cheney and her attorney, basically, they came up with these stories. Liz Cheney called an emergency hearing, and that's where they paraded her before the entire country. Now, you would think you would want to hear from the Secret Service agent who was in the car, the driver, if this really happened. They didn't call the driver in until November, i.e., after the election, to get his testimony. At the beginning, and this is his testimony is one of the documents we were seeking from Homeland Security, and we were finally able to get it. And it's ironic, in the very beginning of his deposition with the Select Committee, his attorney chastises the attorneys on Select Committee. He said, look, you came out with these stories in June. We reached out in July, August, September, and now it's November. We've been trying to get to you guys to tell you the truth of what happened, and now it's November that you're calling us in. And so that tells me right there they were trying to stonewall because they knew what the Secret Service agent was going to say. And then during their deposition, they never asked him about the incident. Did President Trump try to take the steering wheel from you? They never asked him about it. You would think that would be the number one question. He had to insert it on his own, and they tried to block him from saying anything about it. So this is just one piece of the evidence that shows that anything that did not support their preconceived narrative that Trump was behind all of this, he was the cause of the attack on the Capitol, and that he was to blame. Anything that was contrary to that, they suppressed that evidence, hid it from the American people, destroyed it, or sent it to where we couldn't get hold of it. But fortunately, because of the diligence of the committee's work, we were able to get these, and we're starting to come out with all of this information now.
And we're thankful for that. I believe it is your committee that was responsible for the release of some of this footage of Nancy Pelosi on that day. Yes. She had her little daughter videographer, documentarian, clomping around with her everywhere, including as she went through the Capitol and stopped in order to make sure that her daughter had the shot. This is some of my favorite footage. But this video, this was released last week. We wanted to get sort of your response to this. I'm sure you've, obviously you've seen the video, but it's Nancy Pelosi saying, yeah, I'm responsible for the fact that there was no National Guard at the Capitol.
Should we call the Capitol?
Okay, so this is something that blows the hole in the narrative, I think, from a 30,000-foot thermonuclear perspective. If Donald Trump offered 20,000 National Guard troops to be at the U.S. Capitol, then there would be no January 6th.
Right.
Nancy Pelosi is somebody who had the power to accept those National Guard troops and didn't. And now there's video of Nancy Pelosi admitting that it's her that she didn't do that, and now January 6th is her responsibility. It falls on her from a security and responsibility standpoint. That seems pretty damning, Mr. Chairman.
Well, it would be. It's first of all, these videos are again something that was not archived by the Select Committee. We wrote a letter to HBO, hoping we're trying to basically gather all the information that they had, which we're still working on. There's still pieces of missing information. So as part of this, to collect all of every piece of information the Select Committee had, I just wrote a letter to HBO saying, can you send us all the footage that you sent the Select Committee? I did not think they would respond. I thought I would end up having to subpoena them, but they turned right around and sent us everything. And this was unedited. I mean, this is a full clip right there of what her daughter recorded. And when I first saw it, when we received it, I'm like, but that's actually an act of pure leadership, taking responsibility. I agree with her. Yeah, the security of the Capitol is ultimately your responsibility as Speaker. But after the dust settled, it's a different story. She's looking for someone else to pass the blame on. One of the things that we learned out of this video clip, though, is we have two timelines we're dealing with on the National Guard issue. The first is the delay of actually requesting the National Guard. You see, we do know that on January the 3rd, President Trump was briefed on some intelligence that indicated there's a high probability there could be violence at the Capitol on January 6th. We know that President Trump ordered the National Guard to be readied. We also know that he authorized up to 10,000 troops to be used between Metropolitan Police and the Capitol Police. But because of the separation of powers in the Constitution, as you know, the president just can't send the National Guard to the Capitol. It has to be requested. Otherwise, an out-of-control rogue president could send the military over there to take over Congress. So we have that separation of powers. On January the 3rd, President Trump delegated the deployment responsibility to the Secretary of Defense, which is the proper authority. The National Guard was ready. The Quick Reaction Force was ready to go on January 6th with their riot gear. Chief Sund, who was the chief of the Capitol Police, made multiple requests before and during January 6th for the National Guard to be deployed. It's up to the Capitol Police Board, the two sergeant-at-arms from the Senate and the House, and the architect of the Capitol have to approve it. Well, the House sergeant-at-arms works for the Speaker. So we've been trying to figure out, we do know he made multiple requests. Those were denied. And also they were denied because someone in the chain didn't like the optics. That comes up time and time again. My assumption was Pelosi turned down the request. When I look at this video, I think she's genuinely surprised that the National Guard had not been sent earlier. We also do know that at some point during the day, her chief of staff handed her a note on the floor saying the Capitol Police, they're requesting the National Guard. And that's what she's referring to in that clip. She says, just don't hand me a note on the floor asking National Guard. They should have been here before now. So somebody somewhere told the sergeant-at-arms that they're not to ask for the National Guard. So that's our first delay. The second delay was once Pelosi said, yes, get the National Guard here, there was over a 3-hour delay of actually getting the National Guard to the Capitol once they were approved and the order to deploy was given. So we're looking at two different separate delays where either one could have saved lives. If Pelosi would have approved the National Guard on the 5th when Chief Sund requested them on the 5th, I don't think you would have had the violence that you have. I mean, no. You would have had National Guard soldiers there along with the Capitol Police and riot gear, you know, basically protecting the outer barriers. But even if they had just, if the Department of Defense would have deployed the National Guard when it was approved at 2:30, there would have been lives saved, in my opinion, because there was an individual that was trampled well after the time that the National Guard would have arrived. And just the visual of National Guardsmen getting off the bus in riot gear, I think would have quelled some of the violence as well. So this is another example of how information, had this video clip been out in 2021 or 2022, the American people wouldn't have bought this story that Liz Cheney and the Select Committee sold to the American people, that this was all organized and orchestrated by Donald Trump. It's all his fault. And he was knowledgeable of all of this and participated in it, which none of that is shown to be true through the evidence that we're uncovering. And by the way, when we uncover evidence, we're going to make it available to the American people.
So actually, the evidence points to Donald Trump being the #1 person to prevent January 6th. Absolutely. By saying go peacefully to the Capitol, by administering the authority for 20,000 National Guard troops to go and stand at the U.S. Capitol. I've seen the National Guard deployed in Washington, D.C. I lived there for 15 years. You don't step to those guys. Those guys can really lock down a building. And no, it's a military force. There is no way that that civilians are going to mess with that. It is a very, very intimidating look. So there would be absolutely zero January 6th if Donald Trump got his way.
Right.
But it does seem so confusing. It seems like there were so many people that had a different plan for that day, and that they wanted the chaos, and that they were prepared for the fallout of the chaos. And this is a clip I can't get out of my head, and since I got you on the show, I have to play it. It's Nancy Pelosi in her office, you know, whilst the riot is occurring, and she's speaking to her staff, And she says she wants to punch Trump, and that's fine. Like everyone focuses on that. What I'm focusing on is what she says directly afterward, which is trespassing at the Capitol. I've been waiting for this. Here's the clip.
Service said they have dissuaded him from coming to Capitol Hill. They told him they don't have the resources to protect him here. So at the moment he is not coming, but that could change.
I would come, I'm gonna punch him out. This is my
wow, I
moment.
would pay to see
I've
that.
been waiting for this, for trespassing on the Capitol grounds. I'm gonna
Okay,
punch
so-
him out and I'm gonna go to jail.
So I've been waiting for this, trespassing on the Capitol grounds. One, what a strange thing to say. Because the Capitol grounds are like open 365 days a year. You can go like walk right into the Capitol right now as an American citizen, go do a tour. So that's a very peculiar thing to say. And then trespassing is something that they've hit every J6er with as a charge. And it just seems like a very acute and peculiar thing for the Speaker of the House to declare with her little claw and say, oh, yeah, I've been waiting for this. What the hell is that? What does that even mean, Mr. Chairman?
Well, it's kind of in line with the comments she made after the dust had settled, after those who got in the Capitol were cleared. Then she decided to put up fencing around the Capitol with Constantine wire on the top, razor wire, because she likes the optics of that. And from her words is, I want the country to see what Donald Trump did, right? So it's again shifting the blame of there. She's saying, I want Donald Trump to come over here so I can punch him in the face. I'll go to jail for it. They're already starting to pin this on Donald Trump, that the riot was he was planning to come to the Capitol and lead the riot. Well, that's part of the argument the Select Committee has been making, but there is zero evidence whatsoever that there was ever a plan for the president to come to the Capitol. In fact, it's the exact opposite. When the committee did ask Secret Service agents or White House employees, was there a plan to go to the Capitol? They all said no, because that takes a lot of planning. And even the physician would know about it. The Secret Service would know about it. There's extensive planning to get the president to move, even at the last minute, from one place to the other. And there was nothing in place for that. While he was speaking, again, as Donald Trump says, peacefully go to the Capitol and protest. His idea was to go stand around the Capitol, and you've lived in D.C. There's protests there all the time. The area around the Capitol is sectioned off where you get permits. You get a permit and you can have your group there and you can protest. Every permit had been issued, and so there was the intent to be around the Capitol protesting that day. I think anybody in the right mind would understand that when the president says, I want you to go to the Capitol and peaceably protest, to let your voice be heard. And he says, I may go with you. That was a spur of the moment thing. It wasn't even in the transcribed, his teleprompter. It wasn't even in his speech. That's just, you know how Trump is. He ad-libs quite often. That was ad-libbed. And according to the Secret Service agents, when he got back in the car, he said, can we go to the Capitol? And they said, no, sir, we can't safely get you there. He's like, okay. So even his actions in the White House, he did not know about the breach of the Capitol till he was back in the Oval Office. One of the White House's employees, which is from a transcript of an interview the Select Committee did with a White House employee, and this was these were some of the interviews that their transcripts were hidden from us that we were able to obtain. They asked him, were you with the president when he found out that the Capitol had been breached, that there was violence at the Capitol? And he said, yes, I was. And they said, what was the president's reaction? He said he was shocked, he was surprised, and his first words were, get Pelosi and General Milley on the phone to see what they need, right? His reaction was, what can we do to help? Which had been his reaction all along. Even in the planning, we have found out that the Secret Service had recommended to Pelosi that she put non-scalable security fencing around the Capitol for January 6th. She didn't like the optics of it, so she turned it down. So there were efforts, because there was intelligence that the executive branch had, that there was a high probability of violence at the Capitol. That, by the way, that intelligence was given to the Capitol Police Intelligence Division, but it was never passed on to the chief of police. He had no idea that this was there. It's another area we're investigating. Was that information purposely suppressed, or was it incompetence that they didn't pass it along? I mean, you got intelligence says high probability of violence, but the security notice they send out says there's a potential for violence, but highly unlikely. That's the exact opposite of what the intelligence is saying. And so there's a lot of contrast, there's a lot of contradictions, and there's flat out misinformation that came out of the select committee.
So I just before we go, I have to hit on one quick thing. You mentioned Mark Milley there. We've seen a number of articles and quite a bit of testimony out of your committee saying that it was actually, if there was somebody who was really holding up coordination, or if there was a operator from inside of the White House who was ensuring that this day was as bad as it could possibly get, it was Mark Milley. Mark Milley was meeting with Barack Obama's national security advisor in the hours and days leading up to January 6th, Susan Rice. Why on earth, why the hell would you possibly be doing that? And Mark Milley, of course, based on the testimony, held up the National Guard and is one of those people inside of that chain that wouldn't allow the National Guard to go there. Why? It doesn't make any sense, unless, of course, you're trying to sabotage Donald Trump. Your thoughts on the sort of takeaway pressure that people are beginning to apply on Mark Milley and seeing his role in the failures of January 6th?
Yeah, so the picture that you're showing right now is a news article from a hearing that we had where we had 4 high-ranking National Guard members. You're talking about general rank, full colonel, and command sergeant major, and a captain who was the general's aide that day, all testified that once that the National Guard had been formally requested, there were senior officials in the Pentagon who highly recommended the National Guard not be sent because they didn't like the optics. In fact, went as far as, in their opinion, in their testimony, was delaying the National Guard until the violence was over. They didn't want them engaged in the violence. But the issue is that the National Guard, DC National Guard, is called the Guardians of the Capitol. They're in riot gear. They're there to squelch this type of activity. It doesn't do any good to send them after the fact, which Nancy Pelosi used very effectively. She loved the imagery of having National Guard around the Capitol after the fact, but not beforehand. And so the testimony from these high-ranking officials, which were all the same, was that there was efforts within the Pentagon to delay the deployment of the National Guard even after it was approved. Now, Democrats were saying, well, the president should have picked up the phone and called the Pentagon and said, send the National Guard now. Why haven't they been sent? Well, the issue is he had already delegated that authority and that decision-making to the Secretary of Defense on January the 3rd. He had already delegated that authority there. The president's got his hands full with other things. And that decision was fully given to Secretary Miller, which was then given to Secretary McCarthy, which was over he's Secretary of the Army. And so he's the one who was to relay the message to the National Guard, who were ready to deploy, sitting with their equipment on, ready to go. And it still was about 3.5 hours before they were actually sent to the Capitol. And so we're investigating that aspect. And there are several senior officials in the Pentagon that we're wanting to talk to, and we're seeking more information to find out, was it a communications error? What did you guys just make a mistake and you're covering it up? And a lot of times the cover-up's worse than the crime. But we're trying to get to the bottom, because the fact is there were unneeded delays to request the National Guard. There was unnecessarily and unneeded delays in deploying the National Guard. And were those delays purposeful on either end?
Yeah, there was no delay in deploying the National Guard during the Antifa and BLM riots to protect national monuments and to ensure that the violent left didn't storm a building and burn it down. They tried to kill Donald Trump. They burned down buildings at the White House. And I think the left realized very quickly that that would be a very bad look for them right? Because you get these kind of narratives. And so they locked DC down. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. The National Guard was staged in my neighborhood. That's where they were all camped out at, right near the Armory. And so they were perfectly willing to use the National Guard to protect the imagery, to prevent BLM or Antifa from doing something stupid and burning down a monument or raiding a federal building, because they knew that was certainly possible. It is a remarkable turn on January 6th. It is. It really is, quite frankly, quite out of character, and it leads shows like ours to really wonder how pre-planned all of this was.
And that's part of some of what we're hearing and we're looking at is they took a lot of criticism for actions that they took during the riots in 2020. And even General Milley said he didn't like the optics of some of that. Did that play into not sending the National Guard, that you were hesitant because you took criticism when you used them earlier? None of that should come into play. You've got a job to do. You have a duty. You have a constitutional responsibility. When the request was made by the legislative branch, an official request for National Guard assistance, the response should be, let's get them there as fast as we can. We've also been told, well, we had to put together an op plan. Really? Did you not have op plans already together? And simply your op plan is this: send the National Guard to the Capitol. They get sworn in by the Capitol Police, and then they take their orders from the Capitol Police. I mean, that's the extent of the op plan that you need, is just get them there, and then they fall under the jurisdiction of the Capitol Police because they're sworn in as adjunct officers of the police department. And so we're getting a lot of excuses from the Pentagon. What we're wanting is just the truth. Let's just get the truth out there, good, bad, or ugly. And, again, cover up tends to be worse than the actual issue. But someone does need to be held accountable for this. But more importantly, how can we fix it? How can we streamline the process to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that we don't have these kind of failures? The only way that you can fix it is to admit to your failures and then work on it. And so that's another part of our job, is the last phase of our investigation is going to be, well, all right, let's pass some legislation or let's make changes to make sure that this stuff never happens again. And right now, I don't think that there has been any significant changes in the security protocols at the Capitol, because even within the Capitol Police, they're unwilling to look at some of the issues that was there, including the heavy politicization of the Capitol Police. There's too much politics involved in decisions. I really hope that you call Nancy Pelosi in and get her deposition. That would be I think so important in this entire chain. I know it breaks protocol and it hurts people's feelings, but man, Pelosi really needs to start answering questions. There's so many strange happenings that day. And it's, it shocks the conscience, quite frankly, when you actually start to look hard enough at the data and the evidence and not at the talking points. So, Mr. Chairman, we thank you for uncovering truth and for shedding light on this dark day. Salt and light is what we are called to be, and you certainly, sir, have been exposing what really happened. And we're adults; we can handle it, and we appreciate your work. So, thank you and Godspeed. Thank you. I enjoyed being with you.